It is a pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker of Ahva Academic College, Israel, a legal scholar and activist for equality. She was recently a Potemkin visiting University of Chicago and has also taught at Peking University and New York University. She specializes in gender equality, anti-discrimination, and tort law, and has published substantially in these fields. Her signature legal work led twice to her being shortlisted for Israel's Supreme Court, making history as the youngest woman to ever appear on the list and the first woman of Mizrahi descent. Co-founder and chair of Tmura, the Israeli Center for Equality, for whom she has litigated human rights cases and 20 years pro bono. She received her PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, spent her postdoc year as a Fulbright Fellow at Harvard University, and holds an LLM with honors from Yale University. Ifat, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and Purim Sameach for those who are taken away by me from the Purim celebrations, but you will have a few more reading of the Megillah to not miss out on this wonderful holiday that we have. So it is my great honor and utmost privilege to speak to you today. Allow me to open by extending my gratitude to the Center for Israel Studies at AU, its director, Professor Michael Brenner, and its manager, Laura Cutler, she's outside, and of course, Professor Erez Neiman, my dear friend, for inviting me and for hosting one of the first events on Mizrahi studies in the US. I don't know, I've heard some of you talking in the hallway saying, this is it's not very common to participate in such a conference on the Mizrahi issue, and this is true. So presenting here is enormously symbolic for me, given that my own critical Mizrahi legal studies anti-discriminatory theory was primarily developed and nurtured in America during my postdoc stay at Harvard Law. America has been way less political and more graciously analytical in its approach toward the ideas I've developed, allowing me to embark on my academic journey on this topic. My colleagues here will likely agree. Being away from Israel for the first time assisted me back then in finding the courage within me and the encouragement I sought within my mentor then, Professor Duncan Kennedy, to delve into the role of law and the role that it had in discriminating against Mizrahis in Israel. On my talk today, I will go beyond presenting this legal theory of anti-discrimination law and society that I've planned for initially, and offer to draw a line between that and the unfolding Israeli legal political crisis threatening to tear Israel from within. So looked at as a critical satire, I named my lecture today From Salah to Siso, Here is Israel, as a reference to the story of Mizrahi immigrants' life experiences. It is a story that spans across old school discrimination patterns during what I call here the Salah era, and continues through the stage of denial up until our current effort to abolish this discrimination using legal tools, a period I call here the Siso era. The next chapter of this story, as it appears, might become the Salah era reversed, with the slim hope that it will have a remedial effect and not become its last chapter in a way with what goes on in Israel today. So let me introduce you to Salah, the man in the middle, and the Salah era. The movie Salah Shabati, also known as Salah It's Israel from the 60s, comically depicted the life of Mizrahi immigrants in Israel. It tells the story of Salah, an allegedly typical Mizrahi man and immigrant, who is the subject of maltreatment and neglect by the all-Ashkenazi arrogant hegemony, which holds all keys to the basic human services he needs for dignified living. The degrading interactions between the country's young bureaucrats and Salah end up with him deceivingly managing to overcome the system and achieve his ultimate goal, a roof over his family's head. Looked at as a critical satire, the movie indeed emphasized the new immigrant struggle for fair treatment, yet it did so while entertaining and perpetuating racial stereotypes about them. Mizrahis are good-hearted people to a point of non-sophistication and ignorance. They are heavy consumers of welfare system, yet manipulate and abuse it. They suffer from discrimination and derogatory perceptions, which hold a grain of truth given their undeveloped nature and uneducated background as people originating from Arab countries, and the list goes on. The movie was so convincing in its content that it even became the sole Israeli movie to have ever win a Golden Globe Award. I don't know how many of you know that. So look at what is being, projected here in terms of who these people are. They seem not very sophisticated as the picture depicts them. The tongues are outside as a manner of indespicable behavior. They're, I think, apart from the young girl on the left, who eventually won the heart of an Ashkenazi guy, and allegedly rightfully so, as opposed to her other siblings, is the, I think in a way, is like the classic stereotypes of Mizrahis at the time. So the guy we see here is Daniel Siso. Contrary to Salah, Daniel is a distinguished young professional I represented in court a few years ago through my legal NGO Tmura, as Erez introduced it. Siso, who was seemingly the complete opposite of Salah, ultimately, much like him, lost in the struggle for equality. Around the same time, after marking the 50th anniversary of the movie Salah, David Deri, a filmmaker who can be seen as the symbolic son of Salah, made his own movie on the topic, naming it Salah, This is Israel. Deri used the documentary, rather than comedy genre, to present a far less humorous and excruciating experience Mizrahis endured during the years of absorption into Israeli society. The movie documented ample evidence proving that Salah was not reflecting an inability to adjust to living in Israel, some kind of modernity crisis that he was going through, but rather, Deri reclaimed the true meaning of Salah's struggle against a well-organized, purposeful system of discrimination. The documentary sparked heated discussion around the country, providing the masses with access to government documentation in which Mizrahis were named inferior or primitive and treated accordingly, rocked the boat of the Israeli narrative of denial that a systemic discrimination was ever held against Mizrahis. The denial narrative excuses the ill treatment of Mizrahis as a chain of mistakenly made decisions by well-meant pioneers of a miracle-like young state struggling to survive. More than anything, the documentary revealed how stubborn this narrative is and how imperative it is to undermine it in order to bring healing to Israel's intra-Jewish, ethnically rifted society. So the question is, how did it come about that this denial dynamic flourished in Israel and is still flourishing to an extent, to a substantial extent nowadays? So much like the Salah era, where Salah had to use non-legal tools to fight for his basic rights, lawlessness prevailed in the legal field itself. As is well documented, as is well academically proven by now Mizrahi scholars, Mizrahis were systematically discriminated. The discrimination as I will hereby elaborate in my anti-discrimination theory, left no legal traces and therefore prevented Mizrahim from utilizing the legal system, which in retreat ignited an unabashed denial thereof. Accordingly, almost no legal attempts were taken to fight Mizrahi discrimination by the law. And lawlessness also characterized Mizrahi legal scholarship, which was almost non-existent. From its inception, very few scholars in the Israeli legal academia were of Mizrahi, very few of them were of Mizrahi descent, and they were, in a way, shunned from analyzing the Mizrahi status in order not to get into rivalries and clashes with the hegemonic academic legal colleagues. So these were our fellow scholars from the social sciences who inspired us, the legal counterparts, and they were uninhibited by the delineation of formal law. They identified and named discriminatory practices, encouraging us to explore the legal system's role in shaping this reality. So it's only been, by the way, a bit more than a decade ago since the first analytical effort has been made by myself to look at the role that the law had in establishing this dynamic of denial in Israel. And ever since, we've been able to encourage other mainly young Mizrahi legal scholars to delve into the question, the Mizrahi question within the law. So I want to just briefly introduce the basic premises of my theory regarding the need to reconceptualize anti-discrimination law, given the de facto de jure divide that actually structured the denial of Mizrahi discrimination. So when you look at how Mizrahi people were discriminated in Israel, as I said, there were no legal traces to this discrimination. It was actually a de facto based discrimination rather than a de jure based discrimination. And that leads to led me to a counterintuitive pursuit of the idea of discrimination, realizing that, in effect, when you are de jure, when you're being de jure discriminated, you are being given an advantage and tools by the legal system to fight this discrimination. This is a counterintuitive understanding, because clearly we're all against discrimination and no one wants to be discriminated against. But if you suffer from de facto discrimination, you might as well want to be de jure discrimination as well as a means for you to be armed with the tools required to fight this discrimination, because it provides you the difference as a group, a recognized group. You cannot go to the court and ask for a remedy against discrimination unless you prove that you are a part of a discriminated group, right? Imagine me going to the Supreme Court stating that I'm being discriminated against. I was not admitted to this and that. The court would immediately say, well, many others haven't as well been admitted to. And I should say, yes, but this is due to me being part of a historically recognized group that suffers from discrimination. So in Israel, it was not only the fact that it was only de facto and not de jure that wouldn't allow me to set the difference. It is also because the ultimate different group in Israel is, of course, the Arabs. So you have the Jews and the Arabs, and we are, said the court in one of its most known cases, one of the first cases in which Mizrahi brought their grievances of discrimination to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, I don't know what you say when you relate to yourself as a group. We are all Jews. So talking about different type of Jews is discriminatory in itself, the court explains to the Mizrahi petitioners. So in that respect, the Mizrahis are, locked in the fact that on the one hand, you want to belong to the collective, to the Jewish collective, and not be discriminated, but at the same time, you have to differentiate yourself in order for the court to look at you. And even when they tried doing so, the court was opposing that as a discriminatory action by itself. So there was no legitimacy in that respect to speak about the discrimination against Mizrahis. And from that case on, it was in the early 80s, Mizrahis just wouldn't go to the court anymore. There is almost no legally documented cases of Mizrahi petitioners claiming that they were discriminated due to this rejection of the whole concept by the courts. So the question is, of course, how has the denial dynamic affected the status of Mizrahis overall, definitely within the legal system? So what we had as a result of that is not a discrimination disappearing, but rather a discrimination flourishing without any chance of fighting it. And discrimination, if you don't fight it, it just spreads all over. Like, this is the nature of discrimination, in the nature of human beings. So what you see here is a screenshot of a very recent interview taken with the former Chief Justice Aaron Barak, who I admire in many respects and to whom I am very close. So you need to realize that this is also a very, complicated situation for someone like me who admires this man and knows how much he has contributed to protecting human rights in Israel, and under what a vicious attack he is being right now by politicians in Israel. And at the same time, my beloved Aaron Barak has been asked in this interview. It was presented to the public, I think, 2 weeks ago. What do you think about the fact that we have an all-Ashkenazi Supreme Court? Like, couldn't you find a Mizrahi, one suitable Mizrahi judge? The first judge of a true Mizrahi descent, namely someone who grew up, who was born in Iraq, who lived in the transition camps in Israel, and grew up in poverty, like the classic, typical Mizrahi life experience, was Justice Edmond Levy, and he was nominated only in 2001. So Justice Barak answers to that, there were no candidates. And then the journalist who interviews him says, no one? Not even one? And he says, no, we did eventually found this Iraqi judge. And he says, but what about but there are so many Mizrahis in Israel, so many Moroccan people. Couldn't you find one Moroccan guy or woman? And then he says, no, not Moroccan. So you see, like, this is it does a bit injustice with him, but at the same time, this is true. So generally speaking, not only not being recognized as a discriminated group, Mizrahis suffered from inaccessibility to justice at myriad levels. Their discrimination claims, as I said, were denied, and given that the court was their only refuge from governmental discriminatory policies and practices that flourished for tens of years, as my friend here, Tzvi, proved to you, they were left stranded and reliefless. The Israeli Supreme Court was busy building its Bill of Rights outside and inside the constitutional framework, providing protection mainly to powerful groups and minority groups who were mainly women, and then Arabs and gay people. And I say Arabs because the Supreme Court would not grant protection to Palestinians in the occupied territories, but rather to Arab Israelis. And this is not like a rating, some kind of competition between who suffered more. The rating that I present here is who has been recognized as even as a group by the Supreme Court, okay? So Arabs were recognized as a group. They were not given the protection that they warrant. Their discriminatory experience and their status in Israel is very clearly low, but at the same time, when it goes to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court recognized that there's this group and that it suffers from discrimination, okay? This is like the posture that I'm talking about. So only in the recent decade, it has become somewhat more attentive, the Supreme Court, to Mizrahi-related claims, granting reliefs against social security claims, stating the basic rights to water and electricity supply, prohibiting ethnic-based discrimination in ultra-Orthodox schools, and not allowing the privatization of prisons. So these are like, Mizrahi-related interests and issues that the Supreme Court in the last decade has become more attentive to and protective of. But the absence and discriminatory treatment of Mizrahis persisted not only in the constitutional front. It also affected fields that were deemed neutral or irrelevant to the group's quest for equality. See, for example, a research project that you see the results of here. I've recently pursued with my colleague from Tel Aviv, Professor Kricheli Katz, after over a decade of analyzing the ways in which legal categories and doctrines in tort law, personal injury law called here, have been shaped according to social biases, I've decided to look into the simplest tort terrain, namely the compensations provided to plaintiffs. We took the standardized compensation scheme of personal injury law by car accidents, presuming that gaps in compensation, if found, could be explained as emanating from the way judges apply this standardized law unequally. The question was not, for example, how using the wage criteria affects Mizrahis, as we already know that this criteria works against all minorities who suffer from discrimination in the labor market, yet continue to be compensated according to this main issue of their labor market value. What we sought was to see if even within this wage-based paradigm, minorities, including Mizrahis, would be more unfairly affected by judges' decisions. Not shockingly, but definitely alarmingly, the answer to that was positive. In a regression model predicting the monthly wage used by courts to determine plaintiffs' loss of earning, we found that being Mizrahi significantly reduces the monthly wage used by courts by about 3,000 shekels. It's roughly $1,000 and per month. And mind you that this sum amounts to third of the average wage, almost third of the average wage, and half of the median wage in Israel. This is true when comparing individuals with the same earning at the time of that the car accident has happened, who work in similar occupations and are of the same age, gender, marital status, and parental status. In other words, Mizrahi's compensation for future wage loss was lower than Ashkenazis, even after taking into consideration the fact that they overall earn less to begin with. So possible hypotheses to account for these differences, we've been able to classify positive and as opposed to negative descriptions of plaintiffs relating to Ashkenazi and Mizrahi respectively. This systemic differentiation in characteristic judgments made against randomly hurt car accident victims are extremely alarming. Mizrahis are perceived as having less potential to thrive professionally than Ashkenazis. They were viewed as suspicious, and not trusted by courts to honestly represent their true medical condition. Mizrahis might even be less liked by the court, in a way. Any of these hypotheses is disquieting and all point to an obstruction, not to say distraction of justice for Mizrahi plaintiffs under this law. And this is just, a randomly picked law, just because I specialize in tort law and car accident law. That's how it works. Okay, so put aside the reasons for these alarming results. They weren't conscious raising actions to be taken among judges to warn them against their biases. And I can tell you that, unfortunately, no measures of this type were taken, and I was really soliciting the courts to do something of this kind, to be aware of their biases, and my pleas were again and again rejected. And this is an understatement, what I've just said. So the legal system, in a way, just closes its eyes to the results coming out of its own decisions. So building leadership and the elite happens within the academia. This is what we're striving to do just now on the professors as well as students' fronts. Legal scholars of Mizrahi origin spearhead the Mizrahi critique of law, but the ratio in Israeli law schools reveals they comprise only 15% of faculty members. That's all. A closer look, as the one I present here, into this dull number shows that most of this cohort hold positions in colleges, not universities, which sets them at a much, much lower opportunity or provides them with much lower opportunities to prosper and take this academic leadership that is required. Being affiliated with a university confers privileges in Israel on faculty members that don't exist in colleges. Enjoying public prestige, having access to immensely larger state-allocated research funds, traveling to sabbaticals, being connected to academic networks, to teaching positions abroad, etc. All are just a few of the means crucially affecting the ability to develop strong academic hold and recognition. And these are just the formal, commonly known advantages. And by the way, not all of them are known to everyone. There are many others you wouldn't have thought existed. Not being able to land a position myself at the university, although I returned from Harvard and excelled at an LLM from Yale, I know these details first-handedly. I have zero regrets. I feel so lucky to not land a position at a university. I'm the youngest and only Mizrahi president of an academic college in Israel. But at the same time, the story is not me and my own, being content or not content with my own path, but rather, how is it possible that these are the numbers even for people who come back with these amazing credentials? And if I may say, some of my friends here, my colleagues who are, in a way, I'm sorry to offend you, American friends of mine, but still exiled academically, even though they're all excellent, amazing, brilliant scholars that were unable to land positions in Israel as well. So why are the numbers of Mizrahi faculty at universities so low? We are way past the days where our numbers as students in elite university law schools were meager enough to allegedly support the infamous claim of a lack of quality court to choose from, just the way Barak did. Although university law schools are still elitist bastions composed of mainly Ashkenazi students, the percentage of Mizrahi students has grown to around 25% of student body. And incidentally, it should be noted that here too, Ashkenazi students benefit disproportionately from occupying most of the university-based law school seats. These top law schools provide public subsidy in tuition costs, whereas Mizrahi students, mostly graduating from colleges, are burdened with triple the cost for their education without any public subsidy, heavily burdening their own families at best and working around the clock to survive while studying at worst. I can testify that even as a subsidized student at Hebrew University myself, I had to hold 4 jobs to keep my head over the water and lived with a constant stress of a possible economic crisis. I can only imagine how draining it must be for today's college students who are trying to pay triple the sum I paid. And by the way, a recent study done by my colleagues at Tel Aviv University revealed that Mizrahi college graduates also earn much less as lawyers compared to their Ashkenazi counterparts in the colleges and compared to how much they earn as university graduates. So you see how lingering the effect of discrimination is up until these days. The research is from 2018, and my car accident research is from 2021. So despite this backdrop of ethnic barriers to becoming an academic, we're witnessing a flux of Mizrahi junior scholars seeking academic homes. Unfortunately, the majority of them are relegated to colleges, and most recruitments for university faculty continues to be of Ashkenazi individuals. What can be done to change that? We need a more equitable academic system which promotes transparency, one that reconsiders its meritocracy standards and sets measurable criteria for recruitment and promotion of Mizrahi as well as other minority faculty as part of their institutional DEI programs. I can tell you that that was the first resolution that I got as a president for my own college. These tools for reform, resisted for decades by Israeli academia, must become compulsory and be applied with special focus on women whose intersectionality has been particularly devastating to their hiring chances. So academia carries with it a special duty to promote social cohesion and ethical sociological order. As things currently stand, it lags behind, and so does the Israeli legal system. Both are part of the old yet stubbornly sustainable elite, against which regressive political voices in Israel now turn with vengeance. And I have to tell you that this sentence was taken from my keynote speech at Harvard University on Mizrahi legal studies given in 2019, and I said that this is going to be the next step of politicians, and now I just had to change it into current times, and it's amazing to see how this has indeed happened. But after Tzvi showed us that someone has said it in the 60s, who am I to think of myself as a prophet? So what we need to have is a holistic conceptual and physical reform in that respect. Again, I'm talking about Mizrahi legal transformation, but at the same time, you see the little star there. It's to all minorities alike, and I'm very proud to say that Mizrahi legal scholars, and not just legal, but definitely legal scholars, are all concerned with minorities as a whole in their academic work and in their activism, and they're not, just focusing on the Mizrahi issue. So the reform, the real reform that is needed, needs to be transformative and holistic. It has to be applied both in the judiciary, in the jurisprudence that is being developed by the court. So we were talking before about this. One of the people in the audience said that his new family members said that they are worried that someone is taking Judaism out of the curriculum. And I can tell you that in a way, if you look at the way the Israeli law has been interpreted and worked out in Supreme Court decisions, he is not that far removed from the truth. So in a way, there is a sense that the jurisprudence that is heavily relying on liberal ideas, mostly Anglo-American ones, that are being, in a way, transplanted in the Israeli legal system and into Israeli society that is, by its DNA, not liberal in the American sense, is something that needs to be reconsidered. And I think it creates a lot of alienation in that respect as well. So it's also the jurisprudence, the judiciary itself and the profession, and how you teach in the classroom, et cetera, et cetera. The little star that I put here pertains to joint struggles that both Mizrahi and Palestinians that are that hold an Israeli citizenship can forge together. And I know that Zvi was very pessimistic, or he actually used the word, it's gone. This chance is gone. I'm not sure at all that it's gone. I think that in a way, first of all, there are a few examples for such kind of struggles, some of which I led myself and took to the court together, plaintiffs who are Mizrahi and Palestinians walking together to the court to bringing their grievances against the discrimination they suffered due to their Arabness, regardless of whether it was just ethnicity or the origin. So I see a lot of hope in that. Just recently, we've seen it in the regarding the did I put it in here? Yes, the nation-state basic law and the pledge to protect the Arabic language, because under the new basic law of the nation-state law, it was given a special status that is inferior to Hebrew. Now, when you say special, normally it sounds, oh, you're so special, right? But when you see a baby and he's not really a beautiful one, you say, oh, he's very special. He looks very special. So this is like whenever people say special, I know it's dangerous in legal terms. So we've seen Mizrahi scholars. Zvi, were you on the petition as well? Exactly. Beautiful. So here you go. A group of Mizrahi petitioners that were presenting their worry about the downgrading of the Arabic language. And what was more interesting, of course, the Supreme Court did not take it seriously and said something like, yeah, this is just political. You're being political. You're not really interested in the Arabic language the way you would want to put it. It's not really legally elaborate. It's more politically elaborate in your petition. And interestingly, another group of Ashkenazi people petitioned to the Supreme Court as well, saying that they feel that they are being privileged vis-a-vis their Mizrahi and Palestinian counterparts, and that they don't want to be privileged because of this law, not just because of the language, the whole bundle of, God help us, ultra problematic covenants that were presented in the basic law. And the court again said something about how this pledge is completely political, non-legal, and in that respect resorted back to the idea of these, social rifts being social or political, but not legal, and that there are no legal remedies to address these issues, even though the petition was against a law, a basic law, which was a classic constitutional structure of a plea. So I want to just finish with talking about this the boiling point, and that we're at right now, and in many ways, in many respects, this is a Mizrahi boiling point. And Tzvi was also referring to it in his talk. And what we see here is that there is the social system that is still not fully recognizing the denial dynamic is still persistent within the Israeli social politics, not necessarily partisan politics. And there you see how Mizrahis score as in lower socioeconomic status, and that is due to the systemic discrimination and untreated and unrecognized discrimination that they suffer from. Many of my students, for example, in my college, are first generation to education Mizrahi students coming from very challenging socioeconomic background, and the state presents zero means available to them to be able to pursue their higher education. So this might come across as, okay, whatever, this is happening in America on a daily basis, in a way. I'm not that sure that it's true. If you go to a state-funded university, you will be recognized as such. But in Israel, there are many categories that you can fit into and be eligible for funded studies. When you're just Mizrahi of first generation, you get nothing. And I see them struggling to be able to get access to higher education and to graduate. And this is part of the reason why eventually they were unable to elevate themselves to an extent that you would already expect them to be at 75 years after migrating to Israel. When it goes to the political system, the partisan system, there what we see, as Tzvi again put it, a deference to the Likud party, not only but definitely the main sentiment is to the right. There is also the Shas party that is definitely still a magnet to many of the older Mizrahi constituencies and the more ultra-Orthodox group of Mizrahis that were, in a way, in the last 30 years, have become a substantial group within Israeli sociology. They were not there before. It's a copycat of the Ashkenazi that you know from, maybe from here. The Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox communities are now also having a counterpart, a Mizrahi counterpart. By the way, they have separate parties, political parties, to which no other person from another group can enter, right? So Shas can presents only Sephardi or Mizrahi candidates, all men, whereas the ultra-Orthodox counterpart is an Ashkenazi one with only Ashkenazi male. Wonderful. Women are just non-existent somewhere. And these are like, together they make around 25% of the political power in Israel nowadays. And we have the legal system where people feel, many Mizrahis feel that they're being alienated by it, they're excluded from it, and there's the disparate impact that we've been able to witness looking at my research. So this is, I think, the last slide for today, that is asking, so what is the effect of all this, of this boiling point on what we see with the happening with the legal reform in Israel today? So what is very, very worrying I think, is that there is very little Mizrahi support of the opposition to this reform. So you hear about hundreds of thousands of Israelis roaming the streets, protesting against the legal reform. There are not many Mizrahi people on this group, and there are very few Mizrahi legal elite professors, if I may say in a way, such as myself, that can oppose the reform. So I'm there, called upon to protect the legal system almost on a daily basis. And I do it because I care about an independent legal system, and I know how important it is, regardless of all the criticism that I have against the system. But at the same time, there are not these many professors at this rank that can do the same work. So as far as the Mizrahis looking at those who protect the system are concerned, what they see is former Supreme Court justices, all Ashkenazis, and professors, all Ashkenazis, and in the streets, they barely get to see Mizrahim or, for that matter, Arab citizens of Israel. And there is a sense as if this is actually something that only Ashkenazim are worried about, because they're worried about their hegemony being, touched upon and taken away from them. So that takes us to the third point of being abused by the Ashkenazi elite. So the Mizrahi discrimination and the status of Mizrahis in Israel is being abused by both elites in that respect. Those who protect the legal system from being harmed, saying that, this is, the legal system is important to you guys. This is a system that is set to protect the rights of minorities. How can you not stand up and protect it in that respect? Or asking the few Mizrahis there to stand up for the legal system. And on the other hand, we see in the Likud that the whole claim is that the legal reform is actually for Mizrahim. Even though if you look at the details of the reform, I've changed the number of my my glasses in order to make sure that I'm not missing something, because the Minister of Justice stood in one of the most, to me and to other Democrats in Israel, devastating nights a week ago when the laws were starting to pass in the parliament, and he said, "This is a celebration for you, my brothers and sisters, the Mizrahim." And I'm like, who is he talking to? What is he talking about? So it's amazing to see how abusive it is in that respect, to just abuse the true pain and alienation and exclusion that they suffer, just the way Avishai Ben Chaim does it, as you said. And another thing that worries me is the shielding against any criticism. So if I look at it as a chance to tell my colleagues, look at how it shows to the outside. This is like we're trying to protect the system, and while doing it, we reflect exactly what is being held against the legal system. And very often the answer is, in fact, you are right, but this is not the time. And we have to be careful. And let me tell you, I've been given this answer for 20 years now. So maybe now it's not the time, but it hasn't been the time 20 years long as well. So what room for hope is there? I'm not going to leave you here in despair and in worries, but think about some potential for good things to come out of this horrible, horrible crisis that we're in. So first of all, Mizrahi politicians are outside this reform. They're not leading it. There is only one that is, he has his own obsession with the court, and he's back and again, he's the one that speaks against Ashkenazi Jews. But generally speaking, Mizrahi politicians are not part of what goes on now with the crashing of the legal system. I think that there is a way of looking at what happens now as a chance, as an opportunity to rethink the Ashkenaziness, hegemony-based characteristics of the legal system, even though people tell me it's not the time. At the same time, I can tell you that whenever I speak out, I do that as well, and I receive comments for that. And people understand that we cannot continue with the way we used to when it comes to the legal sphere. And I'm telling you that the next target is academia. And this is where we're headed. So I'm hoping that the understanding will be that we will not continue to shield ourselves from within, but rather to make sure that before that attack unfolds, we make the corrections that we need to do in order to come with evidence that this is that there's a change happening. I myself have an offer of a Levantine approach to the Israeli legal system, to its jurisprudence, but this is like a whole full idea of theory that I'm not going to elaborate in here. I just wrote an article on it, and it's going to be published soon in English as well, so I'll be happy to distribute that. And as I said in my opening, maybe we don't know in which direction this crisis will take us, and this could be the Salah era reversed in a manner that will be it will be reversed in the sense that we will not go in this direction again, will not go back to Salah ever, or get to the point where the rage and the frustration of Salah will be revived. So I think an interesting thing happens now when what you see here is a sign put in the entrance to Sderot, which is like a classic underprivileged town in the south. And there's, what you see is a quote from Simcha Rotman, the parliament member who leads the legal reform, and he gave an interview to Haaretz last week, and he's been asked about the Supreme Court and the way it protects minorities, and they said, but you said that the Supreme Court works against minorities. That's the narrative now, that the Supreme Court is the oppressor of minorities in Israel. And he said, yes, the Supreme Court is unattentive to the needs of Mizrahim, blah, blah, blah. And then the journalist asks him, but what about the Supreme Court's decision in the case of Eduardo, where children in Sderot were not provided shield to their schools against the bombs coming from Gaza, because the government that decided to shield them eventually, redirected the money elsewhere. So one of the families in Sderot, Mizrahi, classic Mizrahi town, petitioned to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, indeed, this was a breakage of the government's promise and the money allocation that was designed exactly for that, and compelled the government to use the money that it allocated in order to shield the kids, kindergartens and schools. So that's like, a super classic Mizrahi protection that's been given by the court. And his answer was, Dai chalas, stop it with this nonsense, because this shielding costs money. So Bagatz was playing it cool, like he gave the money for that. But this money was missing elsewhere because of Bagatz. So we see that all he cares about is the power division between the Supreme Court and the government, and it has nothing to do with the kids that, as far as he's concerned, could be left unshielded against the rockets. So that's the new type of campaign that is taking place now. So are Mizrahis in Sderot gonna see it and say, hold on just a second, what's going on in here? Or are they gonna say, okay, what ifs? Like this is another propaganda provided by the left because they wanna keep the Supreme Court to themselves? Days will tell. Thank you very much.
Please do 8 questions, and we'll do it in the same manner as we've done before. If we have questions from students, we'll start with students. Yes, please.
First, I want to say, Ifat, welcome back. It's great to have you again for another great lecture. One question I do have, when it comes to this essential, like as you talked about, this pushback from abuse, why is it that there isn't not really like a strong Mizrahi pushback against the Israeli revolts? For those of you that aren't familiar, back in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a resistance movement called, in Hebrew, HaPantarim. In English, that's the Israeli Black Panther Party. So my question for you, Ifat, is why is there not really this type of pushback today as there was compared to the 60s and 70s?
So I think like one of the explanations might be the drainage of this kind of belief that was instilled in these people in the way they looked at the Supreme Court and expected it to protect their rights. So if you're thinking about the 70s with the Black Panthers protest, and the beginning of the 80s, you get the slap back from the Supreme Court saying there is no such thing as Mizrahim and Ashkenazim in Israel. Then there's like I think it's just a lack of trust in the Supreme Court as a savior in a way. What is interesting is, so why would these people trust the government to do something in their favor? Because we're talking about decades and decades of Likud, of the Likud party being in power, and still many of the issues have not been tackled or remedied. It's for psychologists and sociologists, but I think that when you see the legal system persistently being composed of Ashkenazi leadership, you just don't trust it. And when you look at the Likud, it's true that there has not been a Mizrahi leader, but the Mizrahi people are very much present in the more in the lower tiers of the political type of jobs and offices of the Likud. So there is a sense of accessibility to the political system that is greater than to that of the legal system, unfortunately.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Tamara, and I'm from Israel. So you talked a lot about the education and the law. Something that you didn't touch upon that interests me is the IDF, because we know that Mizrahis really face discrimination there as well. Is there any legal especially like an intelligence elite unit? Is there any legal system that could help them and really develop that? Like how? Can you touch upon that?
That's a great question, Tamara. It shows that you're very well versed with the the life experiences of Israelis and what allows you opportunities along the way in your life, and the army is a focal point in that respect, a very important one. So the army is, from a legal standpoint, is a kind of a black hole. Like, you don't know what goes on there. It's all about the army's needs. Women were able to challenge that with their own pledges to be allowed into male-only positions, and the court was willing to interfere. But then think of a male coming, or a guy coming and saying, I was not admitted to the pilot course, the most prestigious one in Israel, based on what? So what? Like 99% of those applying are not admitted. So you go back to the fact that you don't have a latch of recognition to a group to bring this kind of pledge to the Supreme Court. And other than that, the Supreme Court, the issue of how people are being assigned different courses in the army is something that remains, unknown to the public, because it's all about secrecy of security and so on and so forth. So I think an interesting thing that happens right now is that in many respects, while in the past the army used to be the, again, another hegemonic bastion, it now isn't. And the high-tech industry has become this bastion of hegemonic ruling. So we see in a way the high offices in the army are now positioned with or occupied mainly by Mizrahi men. And one of them is the head of HR, like Rosh Aka, and he's of a Mizrahi descent. So he has just recently established a group of professors and social activists and so on and so forth to become on his advisory board. I'm one of these people, and he's been working to change the way the army works to assign different opportunities and roles to people coming from different backgrounds. It's still, there's a lot of work to do, and nowadays, the most prestigious units that are all cyber-related ones are mostly Ashkenazi, and they bestow on those who graduate from the army like an amazing or a set of opportunities for actually lavish life that is not allowed to those who are just in combat units, where you now see mainly Mizrahis and women. So there's this discriminatory disadvantage that is being created in there as well, and we're working together to try and dismantle it somehow. We won't be able to dismantle, but just to ameliorate it.
Michael, I believe you wanted to ask something? And then Tzvi.
I actually wanted to ask something more general, which also relates to your table of Ashkenazi versus Mizrahi professors and so on. I wonder, isn't there a third group, and maybe actually Tzvi, it might also be something for Tzvi, people who, isn't there an increasing group of young people where it's not so easy to define if they are Mizrahi or Ashkenazi, because they have maybe two grandparents who are from North Africa and others who are from Europe. I mean, my own family, I see this quite a lot, actually. And where do they fall? And or do I exaggerate it? I mean, when President Rivlin a few years ago talked about the 4 tribes, it was interesting because, of course, it was not Ashkenazim versus Mizrahim, but it was Haredim, national religious, Arab, and secular Jews, because they have their own school system, but they also mostly, I would say, marry amongst each other. But what about Ashkenazi and Mizrahi,
Half-half.
mixing?
Mixes. So, in a way, there is a persistent number of inter-ethnic marriages in Israel that talks about around 30% of mixed families. So first of all, that implies that the vast majority of tribes, of ethnic tribes, marries within itself. And that is mainly due to spatial segregation that still persists in Israel. So what we do as scholars, we normally, if we don't know to identify who's who, we go by last name with the assumption that it might, work to both sides. So maybe I'm a Bitton, but I'm half Sternberg. I'm not. My kids are. And at the same time, it could work the other way. And in cases where we don't know, or there are these mixed groups, we just take the 30-70% ratio and use it within our research. So this is like from a methodological point of view. From another point of view, I think it is very tricky because, I look at my kids, for example. My daughter looks that I almost dare say, because I met Erez's daughters yesterday, and I told him, oh my God, they look so much like my own daughter. So she could be the daughter of Erez and me, the way she looks, and not of Mr. Sternberg and me, as opposed to my son. So she could be perceived as Mizrahi. She can pass as Mizrahi and therefore be subject to discrimination in all sort of ways. But at the same time, she's the daughter of a professor and a lawyer from Herzliya. She's been given amazing opportunities just by being in that position, that no Mizrahi girl who looks like her from an underprivileged town would be given. So it's tricky, and that should not, in a way, that should not paralyze our ability to speak about it. But there is a caveat to these numbers in that respect.
Michael, maybe I just also wanted to, on that subject, the Israeli Bureau of Statistics, what it did several years back is that they canceled out for third generation, and it's only Israeli. So that
No, not anymore. I was going to speak about
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
So just last year.
Yeah. I have 3 points of information just. So on the IDF, a former colonel from the psychology wing of the IDF, Zev Lehrer, he left the army. After he left the army, he did a PhD in sociology. Happens to some people, and he proved that the quality ranking that the army would assign to people who just been drafted before they're drafted, which determines everything, not just what they do in the army, but later on what they do in life, was systematically capped at a lower level for any Mizrahi or Mizrahi man or woman who are going to the army. In other words, if the highest number is 53,
It's 56, and I got a 54.
Yeah, but you can never make
You couldn't get a 56. It was impossible for our generation.
It was impossible to get that, no matter, like you could come from a very, very rich Mizrahi family and went to Oxford, but you still, because of your origin, you would get only 54. It was 2 points. It was a point less. The point is it was systematic. Okay. Yeah. Now, on the Bureau of Statistics and mixed marriages, the Bureau of Statistics wanted to cancel the Afro-Asian or what they call Asia-Africa notation, yes, And a sociologist who is a friend of ours, she did a lot of studies, Sigal Nagar-Ron, she did almost a personal crusade against that, and she made...
We were also involved in that. I met with the head of the Bureau of Statistics to tell him how oppressive and discriminatory it is, because to him, it was the way to eliminate discrimination.
Yeah, if the Bureau of Statistics would have eliminated that notation, we would not know anything about ethnic divisions in Israel anymore. So the miracle is that they reversed that, and now it's still going to go to the third generation. Final point on mixed marriages. There is a study that found that if the father, in mixed families, if the father is Mizrahi, the children do less better than if the father is Ashkenazic in mixed families. Okay? Now, both categories, they do, if you're 100% Mizrahi or 100% Ashkenazic, you are in the both sides of the spectrum. The mixed families are in the middle. But within that, you see now a new division emerging. If the father is Mizrahi, yes, they do less than if the father is Ashkenazic.
Because of the surname, the last name.
That's the persistence.
That is more apparent to the naked eye.
Other questions? Well, actually, I have one. Now, you spoke about the lack of category, legal category in Israel for Mizrahim, right? Which is the source of the problem of recognition, legal recognition. You know, I can think about that and say that probably the reason is that it goes against the ethos of Israel as a country that assembles all tribes, right?
Just a second, I think it's mine. This is somebody telling me.
Okay.
Answer this one.
Okay. So the question is, if this expectation is at all realistic in a country that established itself on the idea of assembling all Jewish tribes, would you think that this is at all something which is likely to happen? I'm talking about legal recognition of one Jewish group, the Mizrahi group, right? Because basically, how can you claim for discrimination if you cannot, base it on a certain category that you are being discriminated against, right?
Yes. So I think there is no such chance anymore. I suspect that the legal system, seeing what happens outside, because this is like, it's like a bubble now, because all people talk about now the prime minister is talking about Ashkenazim and Mizrahim, and the legal system is still, we don't know what this is. And now it sees it as a threat to its own independence. So I doubt it that this would happen. There was a one group, Jewish group, that was able to obtain recognition, but not through anti-discrimination law, but rather through affirmative action law, which is the Ethiopian Jews. But with them, it was easier in the sense that, it is so apparent, it is so discreet that we cannot deny, and also they are being so heavily discriminated against that if you provide them with legal tools to fight against this discrimination, they will never be able to secure equal opportunities for themselves. So the legislator did some, a maneuver in which you do not recognize the group as discriminated, but you provide it with affirmative action laws, which are very prevalent in Israel, which is very impressive as long as it goes to Arabs in Israel. Again, there is no such group named Arab. So I'll switch to Hebrew for a second. אומרים ערבי, okay? In Hebrew. So if you search in the legal data the word ערבי, you're going to get some kind of a law that is called, Aravi is like Arvei Shabbat, the night. Aravi is like night. So you will find all kind of interesting laws, but no one mentions Aravim. So Arabs are not discriminated against de jure in Israel as well, but their social recognition and status is so clear, and there are laws designated to Jews, like the law of return, that you don't need to talk about Arabs, because it's clear if it's for Jews, for who it is not. But with Ethiopian Jews, you don't have these distinctions that are very clear, but their distinctiveness is so clear that the law has used the same mechanism of not discriminating de jure, but allowing equal opportunity, allowing affirmative action to them, to Arabs, and to Haredim. Exactly. Who was that? Who? Oh, thank you, Laura. Thank you. So exactly, and I think like you see the the abnormality of how the legal system operates. So, and nowadays with all the laws that are being passed, this is how it's going to work from now on. The law is just words that we can use as means to manipulate whatever we want. And once it's de jure recognized, this is it. That's all we need. That's the magic, but that's the spell of the law. And this is something that we should be aware of as well. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for waiting here, for bearing with us. Thanks a lot.